The rain fell in relentless sheets, drumming against the pavement and cascading off awnings, turning the streets of Chicago into shimmering rivers under the faint glow of streetlights. Oliver Grayson adjusted the collar of his overcoat, gripping his umbrella tightly as he maneuvered through the downpour. The city felt heavy tonight, the weight of the storm echoing the fatigue in his own chest. It had been a grueling business trip, one that had taken him halfway across the globe and left him longing for the comfort of his estate, if not for its warmth, then for the familiar silence it offered. Just a few more blocks, he muttered under his breath, his Italian leather shoes splashing through shallow puddles. The cold seeped through his coat, but it was nothing compared to the chill he felt in his heart, one he couldn't explain, but couldn't shake either. As he crossed a dimly lit alley, a sound broke through the rhythmic patter of rain. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it stopped him in his tracks. Oliver turned his head, straining his ears. At first, he thought it was the wind, a stray note in the symphony of the storm. But then it came again, a thin, fragile cry, a baby's cry. "No, it can't be," Oliver murmured, shaking his head as if to dispel the thought. "I must be hearing things." But the sound came again, louder this time, and unmistakably human. His heart quickened, and an inexplicable urgency overtook him. He turned toward the alley, the darkened passage narrowing like the throat of some foreboding beast. The cries grew louder as he moved closer, his polished shoes now soaked and splattered with grime. Halfway down the alley, he froze, his breath hitching in his throat. There, tucked beneath a wet and sagging cardboard box, was a small bundle wrapped in a tattered blanket. His hands trembled as he knelt, ignoring the cold water that seeped through the fabric of his pants. Gently, he peeled back the blanket to reveal the source of the cries, a tiny red-faced baby, its tear-streaked cheeks glistening in the dim light. The sight was so jarring, so impossible, that Oliver felt his chest tighten. Who would? His voice broke, unable to finish the question. Carefully, he cradled the baby, its fragile body trembling against the damp cold. As he adjusted the blanket around the child, something around its neck caught his eye. A glint of gold, faint but distinct. He pulled the fabric aside and found a delicate necklace with a small pendant hanging from the chain. His breath caught as he examined it. Inside the pendant was a photo, a familiar face framed in gold. "Isabel, what?" His voice wavered as he stared at the smiling image of his wife. The necklace was unmistakable, the same one he had gifted her years ago. "How is this possible?" Oliver whispered, his mind racing with questions that offered no answers. He looked down at the baby, its cries softening as if sensing the comfort of his arms. "Isabel," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the rain. "What are you hiding from me?" For a moment, he stood motionless, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. But as the chill deepened, he knew he couldn't stay there. With a newfound resolve, Oliver tightened the blanket around the baby and pulled his coat closer to her to shield them both from the elements. "You're coming with me," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging within him. "And I'll find out the truth, no matter what." As he stepped out of the alley and into the night, the weight of the child in his arms felt heavier than it should. It wasn't just a baby. It was a mystery, and perhaps the key to unlocking the secrets that had begun to erode the foundation of his life. The rain showed no sign of letting up, but Oliver's steps quickened. For the first time in years, he felt the pull of a purpose stronger than anything money or power could offer. A purpose tied to the fragile life he now held close to his chest. And with every step, a single question reverberated in his mind. What else has Isabel? The grand estate loomed ahead, its imposing gates parting with a soft hum as Oliver approached in his rain-slicked car. The drive up to the mansion, usually lined with pristinely trimmed hedges and warm, glowing lanterns, felt colder tonight. As the vehicle came to a stop under the arched entrance, Oliver hesitated, glancing down at the sleeping baby cradled securely in his arms. The infant's soft breaths were a stark contrast to the storm of questions raging within him. Carrying the child, he stepped into the cavernous foyer of his home. The marble floor echoed his footsteps as he called out, "Isabel, are you awake?" Silence. The house was oppressively quiet, save for the faint ticking of the antique clock that loomed over the entryway. Oliver adjusted the baby in his arms, his usually composed demeanor unraveling. The mansion, though a symbol of his success, now felt like a gilded cage, its grandeur doing little to mask the tension that had crept into his marriage over the years. He'd convinced himself it was the strain of his work, but now, clutching this child and the photo that defied explanation, Oliver wasn't so sure. Ascending the staircase with determined steps, he found himself heading toward Isabel's suite. The lights under her door spilled out faintly, a beacon guiding him toward the confrontation he knew was inevitable. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open. Inside, Isabel sat at her vanity, brushing her long auburn hair. At the sound of the door, she turned, her expression lighting up when she saw him. "Oliver, you're back earlier than I thought," she said, her voice filled with warmth. She rose to greet him, but her smile faltered when she noticed the bundle in his arms. Her green eyes widened, confusion and concern etched into her delicate features. What is that?" Oliver closed the door behind him, his gaze fixed on her. "I found a baby," he said simply, his voice devoid of its usual confidence. He stepped closer, unwrapping the blanket slightly to reveal the sleeping infant. "A baby?" Isabel's voice quivered, her hands instinctively clutching her robe tighter. Where did you find this child?" "In an alley," Oliver replied, his tone sharper than intended. But that's not the strangest part. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the delicate gold necklace he had removed from the baby's neck. As he held it up, Isabel's breath caught audibly. "Isabel," Oliver began, his voice heavy with suspicion. "This necklace, the one I gave you on our first anniversary, it was around the baby's neck, and inside, a photo of you." Her face paled, the color draining from her cheeks as she staggered back. She grasped the edge of the vanity for support, her wide eyes locked on the necklace. I don't understand," she stammered. "That can't be possible." Oliver studied her reaction, searching for some sign of recognition or guilt. "Then explain it to me, Isabel. How did this baby end up wearing a necklace with your photo? Who left him there? What's going on?" Tears welled in her eyes, and she shook her head. "I swear I don't know. Oliver, please, you have to believe me. I've never seen this baby before in my life." Her denial only fueled his frustration. "You're lying," he accused, his voice rising. "There's no way this is a coincidence. Someone abandoned this child, and they wanted me to find it, wanted me to find this." He held up the necklace for emphasis. Isabel's legs gave way, and she sank onto the edge of the bed, her trembling hands covering her face. "I'm not lying," she whispered through her tears. "I don't know what's happening." Oliver paced the room, the baby stirring slightly in his arms, but not waking. The storm outside matched the turmoil within him, lightning flashing intermittently through the windows. "I want the truth, Isabel," he demanded, his voice hard. "No more secrets." "I don't have answers to give you," she cried, her voice breaking. "I don't know who that baby is or why they have my necklace. I swear, Oliver, I don't know. The tension in the room reached a boiling point. Oliver wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that the woman he had built his life with wasn't hiding something this monumental. But the necklace, the photo, and the baby in his arms painted a picture he couldn't ignore. Before he could press further, Isabel's head suddenly lolled to the side. Her body went limp, and she collapsed onto the bed. "Isabel!" Oliver shouted, rushing to her side. He placed the baby down on the bed, his hands shaking as he checked her pulse. It was weak but steady. "Help!" he bellowed, his voice echoing through the house. Within moments, the household staff arrived. Odessa, the housekeeper, and Michael, the butler, hurried into the room, their faces pale with worry. "Call an ambulance," Oliver barked at Michael, who nodded and rushed off. Odessa approached cautiously, her eyes flitting between the baby and Isabel. "Sir, what happened?" "She fainted," Oliver said tersely. "We need to get her to the hospital immediately." As Michael returned to report the ambulance was on its way, Oliver gently lifted Isabel, cradling her in his arms. The baby began to fuss, its small cries filling the room. Odessa quickly picked up the child, holding it with surprising tenderness. "Take care of him," Oliver instructed, before rushing down the stairs with Isabel. The minutes that followed felt like hours. The ambulance arrived, and Oliver rode with Isabel, his mind a whirlwind of fear and unanswered questions. As the city lights blurred past the window, he glanced down at her pale face. "You have to wake up, Isabel," he murmured, his voice cracking. "I need you to explain this to me. I need you to fight." The storm outside raged on, but inside the ambulance, a heavier storm brewed. Oliver couldn't shake the image of the baby in that alley, or the inexplicable connection to his wife. As the vehicle sped toward the hospital, he silently vowed to uncover the truth, no matter what it cost him. The sterile white walls of the hospital loomed over Oliver as he sat in the waiting room, his head buried in his hands. The distant hum of medical machines and the occasional murmur of nurses created a tense backdrop. His world had been turned upside down in a matter of hours, and now he faced the possibility of losing Isabel, the woman who had been the anchor in his chaotic life. The baby, who had remained quiet through most of the ambulance ride, now lay in a small crib beside him, provided by the hospital staff. Oliver glanced over at the infant, his heart filled with a confusing mix of emotions. He had saved this child from the rain-soaked alley, but in doing so, had plunged his own life into an abyss of uncertainty. A young doctor entered the waiting area, his expression professional, but tinged with concern. "Mr. Grayson?" he asked softly, drawing Oliver's attention. Oliver stood abruptly, his tall frame towering over the doctor. "Isabel, how is she? Is she going to be all right?" The doctor hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Your wife is stable for now, but there's something you need to know. During our examination, we discovered she has acute leukemia. It's advanced, and she requires a bone marrow transplant as soon as possible. Without it, I'm afraid her condition will deteriorate rapidly." Oliver felt the floor tilt beneath him. His mind struggled to process the words. Leukemia, a life-threatening disease. And she hadn't said a word about it. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "She never told me. I didn't know." The doctor placed a hand on his shoulder, his tone firm yet empathetic. "Many patients in her position try to protect their loved ones by keeping it to themselves. But now is the time to act. The sooner we find a donor, the better her chances." Oliver nodded mechanically. "A donor? How do we find one?" "We'll test her family first," the doctor explained. "Immediate relatives are often the most compatible. Does she have any siblings?" The question hit Oliver like a thunderbolt. Siblings. Isabel had never mentioned family, let alone a sibling. Yet the events of the past few hours, the baby, the necklace, and her fainting spell hinted at secrets he couldn't ignore. "There's a possibility," he said, his voice faltering. "I'll look into it." As the doctor departed, Oliver sank back into his seat, his mind racing. The baby stirred, letting out a soft whimper that jolted him back to the present. He leaned over, gently placing a hand on the infant's tiny chest. "You might be the key," Oliver murmured, "but I need to know who you are, and why you were left for me to find." Back at the mansion, Oliver's frustration boiled over as he poured himself a glass of whiskey. The staff had returned the baby safely, now sleeping peacefully in one of the guest rooms. But peace was the last thing Oliver felt. He pulled out his phone and dialed Ethan Blake, a trusted private investigator he had worked with on past corporate cases. Ethan was a man of few words, but his results always spoke volumes. "Oliver," Ethan answered after the first ring, his tone brisk. "What's the emergency?" "I need you to dig into something personal," Oliver said, his voice tight. He quickly recounted the events of the night, from finding the baby to Isabel's fainting spell, and the revelation of the necklace. When he finished, there was a brief silence on the other end of the line before Ethan replied, "You're saying this baby might be connected to Isabel? And that necklace? It's the same one you gave her?" "Yes," Oliver said, pacing the room. "I don't know how, but I need answers. Isabel's in the hospital, and she can't explain anything right now. Start with her background, family, old connections, anything." Ethan's voice was firm. "Consider it done. I'll get back to you as soon as I have something." As the call ended, Oliver exhaled deeply, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He returned to the guest room, standing over the crib where the baby lay. The moonlight streaming through the window illuminated the child's delicate features. "Who are you?" Oliver whispered, his voice heavy with emotion. "And what do you have to do with Isabel?" The following morning, Oliver was back at the hospital, sitting beside Isabel's bed. Her pale face was framed by the tubes and monitors that surrounded her. The sight made his heart ache. She stirred, her eyelashes fluttering before her green eyes opened slowly. When she saw Oliver, her lips curled into a faint smile. "You stayed," she murmured. "Of course I stayed," Oliver said, his voice soft, yet tinged with frustration. "You scared me half to death, Isabel." She sighed, her gaze drifting to the ceiling. "I'm sorry, Oliver. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "You didn't mean for it to happen." "But it did," he replied, leaning forward. "And now I'm sitting here, trying to figure out what's going on. The baby, Isabel, who is he? And why was he wearing your necklace?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but she shook her head weakly. "I don't know, Oliver. I promise you I don't know." Her voice cracked with desperation, and for a moment, Oliver wanted to believe her. But his gut told him there was more to the story. Before he could press further, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Ethan. Oliver stepped into the hallway to answer. "Tell me you have something." Ethan's tone was grave. "I dug into Isabel's past like you asked. Turns out she wasn't an only child. She had a twin sister, a woman named Danielle Reynolds. But here's the thing. Danielle disappeared years ago. No one's heard from her since." Oliver's grip on the phone tightened. A twin sister. A missing twin sister. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but the picture they formed was far from clear. "And there's more," Ethan continued. Danielle's name popped up in connection to a string of incidents, fights, thefts, erratic behavior. It seems like she had a troubled past. Oliver leaned against the wall, his mind racing. If Danielle's the one who left the baby, why? What does she want? That's the million-dollar question, Ethan said. But if she's involved, she's playing a dangerous game. As Oliver ended the call, his heart pounded. The revelation of Danielle's existence raised more questions than it answered. He knew he had to confront Isabel about her sister, but his instincts told him the truth would be anything but simple. Re-entering the room, he found Isabel watching him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and hope. "Who's Danielle?" he asked, his voice steady but firm. Her breath hitched, and she turned away, tears streaming down her face. "Oliver, oh, please," she whispered. "Not now." But Oliver wasn't willing to wait any longer. "Yes, now. Your life. This baby's life. It's all connected, and I need to know the truth." Isabel met his gaze, her lips trembling. "I'll tell you everything," she said, her voice breaking. "But you have to promise me one thing." "What's that?" She reached for his hand, her grip weak but determined. "Promise me you won't hate me." Oliver's heart clenched, dread pooling in his stomach. "I promise." As her tears fell silently onto the pillow, Isabel took a deep breath and began. "It's about Danielle." Isabel lay motionless, her face pale against the stark white hospital pillow. Oliver's heart pounded as her trembling hand gripped his. Her eyes, filled with a mix of fear and regret, locked onto his. "It's about Danielle," Isabel whispered. Her voice cracked, as though speaking her sister's name was enough to reopen a long-buried wound. Oliver sat back, his jaw tightening. The name lingered in the air like a phantom, heavy with unspoken truths. "Start from the beginning," he urged, his tone firm but laced with a gentle plea. "I need to understand everything." Isabel swallowed hard, her gaze shifting to the window. The soft glow of morning light cast shadows across the room, a cruel contrast to the darkness in her voice as she began. "Danielle was my twin," Isabel said, her words trembling. "But we couldn't have been more different. I was the quiet one, the rule follower. Danny was wild, reckless. She craved attention, and she hated that I was always seen as the perfect twin." Oliver leaned forward, hanging on every word. He had never heard Isabel speak with such raw vulnerability before. The composure she always carried was now shattered, revealing a side of her he didn't recognize. "She resented me," Isabel continued, her voice thick with emotion. "Our parents favored me, or at least that's how Danny saw it. She would act out, stealing, lying, anything to get noticed. It only pushed our family further apart." Oliver's brow furrowed. "What happened to her? Why haven't you ever mentioned her before?" Isabel's lips quivered, and she closed her eyes, as though summoning the courage to continue. "When we were 18, Danny got into trouble, serious trouble. She was arrested for theft, and our father refused to bail her out. He said it was the only way she'd learn." Her voice broke, and tears streamed down her cheeks. "She never forgave us for that. When she was released, she disappeared. No calls, no letters, nothing. I thought she was gone for good." Oliver's mind raced as he pieced together the fragments of Isabel's story. A twin sister, abandoned by her family, fueled by bitterness and anger. It was a recipe for disaster. "And now she's back," Oliver said, his voice low. "She left that baby for us to find. Why, Isabel? What's she trying to do?" Isabel shook her head, her tears falling freely. "I don't know. I don't know what she wants or why she's doing this. But I'm scared, Oliver. She's capable of anything." Before Oliver could respond, His phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen. Ethan Blake. He stepped into the hallway to answer, his voice tense. Ethan, what do you have? I've dug deeper into Danielle's past, Ethan said, his tone grim. After she disappeared, she bounced between cities, petty crimes, aliases, but nothing major until recently. It seems she's been obsessed with tracking Isabel. Oliver's grip tightened on the phone. Tracking her? Why? It gets worse, Ethan continued. I found a connection between Danielle and a man named Vincent Mallory, a known manipulator with a history of coercion. If Danielle's been working with him, it's possible she's being used for something bigger. Oliver's stomach churned. The idea of Danielle being manipulated, or worse, conspiring with someone dangerous, made his blood run cold. Did you find anything about the baby? Ethan hesitated. Not yet, but I've got a lead. There's someone who claims to have seen Danielle recently. I'll meet with them and report back. As the call ended, Oliver returned to Isabel's room, his mind clouded with unease. She looked at him, her tear-streaked face filled with apprehension. Was that about Danny? She asked softly. Oliver nodded. Ethan's following a lead. But Isabel, if she's involved with dangerous people, this could be bigger than we realize. Isabel clutched the bedsheets, her knuckles white. She won't stop, Oliver. Danny always believed the world owed her something. She's not just coming after me. She's coming after us. That evening, Oliver sat in his study, the weight of the day pressing heavily on his shoulders. He swirled a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring at the flickering fireplace. The baby's cries echoed faintly from the guest room upstairs, a constant reminder of the mystery that consumed his every thought. He pulled out the necklace again, running his thumb over the tiny photo of Isabel. What did Danielle hope to achieve by leaving this behind? Was it a cry for help or a declaration of war? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. He turned to see his butler, Harold, standing in the doorway, a phone in his hand. Sir, you have a call. It's urgent. Oliver took the phone, his heart pounding. This is Oliver. A deep, unfamiliar voice answered. If you want the truth about the baby, meet me at the corner of 5th and Pine. Midnight. Come alone. The line went dead before Oliver could respond. He stood frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear. The weight of the cryptic message was undeniable. Whoever had called knew something, and Oliver was determined to find out what. At exactly midnight, Oliver arrived at the designated corner. The streets were eerily quiet, the only sound the faint hum of distant traffic. He scanned the area, his breath fogging in the cold night air. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man with disheveled hair and a scruffy beard, his eyes darting nervously. You're the one who called me? Oliver asked, his tone sharp. The man nodded. You want answers about Danielle? About the baby? I have them. Start talking, Oliver demanded, stepping closer. The man's voice trembled. Danielle blames Isabel for everything. Her struggles, her failures. She thinks your wife stole the life she was supposed to have. And that baby, he's part of her revenge. Oliver's blood ran cold. What do you mean? What's Danielle planning? Before the man could answer, a loud crash echoed from the alley behind them. Oliver turned sharply, his instincts on high alert. But when he looked back, the man was gone, leaving nothing but a scrap of paper fluttering on the ground. Oliver snatched it up, his heart racing as he read the hastily scrawled words, "Find the house where it all began." As he stood in the desolate street, clutching the note, a chilling realization gripped him. Danielle wasn't just after Isabel. She was after everything they held dear, and she wouldn't stop until she got it. The air was thick with tension as Oliver stood on the dimly lit corner, clutching the slip of paper. The words, "Find the house where it all began," burned in his mind like an unanswered riddle. He glanced around the empty street, the faint hum of a distant car, the only sound breaking the silence. Oliver's instincts screamed danger. The stranger's abrupt disappearance and cryptic message only deepened his unease. Whatever was unfolding, he was walking blindly into it. But he had no choice. Danielle's shadow loomed over his family, and the truth about the baby was a thread he couldn't let slip. Hours later, back in his mansion, Oliver sat in his study, the note laid flat on his desk. His fingers drummed against the polished wood as he wrestled with his next move. On one hand, he couldn't ignore the possibility of this being a trap. On the other, the note offered a tangible lead. A knock at the door broke his train of thought. Harold entered, his expression cautious. "Sir, there's someone at the gate. A woman. She says she has information about the child." Oliver's pulse quickened. "Did she give her name?" Harold shook his head. "No, sir. But she insists it's urgent." Without hesitation, Oliver followed Harold to the entrance. The cold night air bit at his face as he approached the gate. A woman stood in the shadows, her hood pulled low, concealing most of her face. "Who are you?" Oliver demanded, his voice steady despite his racing heart. The woman stepped closer, allowing the light to catch her face. She was younger than he expected, with sharp, watchful eyes. "My name isn't important," she said softly, "but I know about Danielle, and I know what she's planning." Oliver stiffened, his eyes narrowing. "Why should I believe you?" The woman sighed, her breath visible in the frigid air. "Because if you don't, you'll never find the baby, and you'll never uncover the truth about your wife's past." Inside the mansion, the woman sat across from Oliver, her hands folded tightly, as if trying to steady herself. Oliver watched her closely, his suspicions heightened. "Start talking," he said. "If you're here to waste my time." "I'm not," the woman interrupted, her tone firm. "Danielle isn't working alone. She's been manipulating people for years, using her story to gain sympathy and resources. But her anger isn't just about Isabel. It's about power." Oliver's brow furrowed. "Power? What are you talking about?" The woman leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Danielle believes Isabel's success, her life with you, her reputation, was stolen from her. She's convinced that if she can ruin Isabel, she'll reclaim what she lost. And the baby? That's her leverage." Oliver felt his chest tighten. "Leverage for what?" "To break Isabel completely," the woman said, her gaze unwavering. "To make her suffer in every way possible." Oliver's mind raced. Where is Danielle now? Where is she keeping the baby? The woman hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. "There's a house," she said finally. "A place she mentioned once. It's tied to your wife's childhood. A place she said was filled with secrets. That's where she's taken the child." Oliver stood abruptly, his fists clenched. "Where is this house?" The woman slid a piece of paper across the table. "This is all I know. But be careful, Mr. Grayson. Danielle isn't just playing games. She's dangerous." Oliver arrived at the address just as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon. The house stood at the edge of a wooded area, its exterior weathered and overgrown. It looked abandoned, but Oliver knew better than to trust appearances. He parked his car a safe distance away and approached on foot, his movements deliberate and silent. As he neared the house, he noticed faint footprints in the dirt, a sign someone had been there recently. Taking a deep breath, Oliver stepped onto the creaking porch. The front door was slightly ajar, and a faint light flickered from within. Every muscle in his body tensed as he pushed the door open, his eyes scanning the room. The interior was as dilapidated as the exterior. Dust-covered furniture and peeling wallpaper gave the place an eerie, forgotten quality. But what caught Oliver's attention was the sound of a baby's faint cry coming from upstairs. "Liam," he whispered, his heart pounding. Without hesitation, he made his way toward the staircase. At the top of the stairs, Oliver found himself facing a closed door. The baby's cries were louder now, cutting through the oppressive silence. He reached for the doorknob, but before he could turn it, a voice stopped him cold. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Oliver froze, his hand still on the doorknob. He turned slowly to see Danielle standing at the end of the hallway, her arms crossed. Her resemblance to Isabel was striking, but her expression was harder, colder. "Danielle," Oliver said, his voice steady despite the fury building within him. "Where is the baby?" She smirked, tilting her head. "Safe. For now." Oliver took a step toward her. "What are you trying to prove? What do you want from us?" Danielle's smile faded, replaced by a look of raw bitterness. "What I want, Oliver, is justice. For years, I was cast aside, while Isabel got everything. Our parents' love, a perfect husband, a perfect life. And now she'll know what it feels like to lose." Oliver clenched his fists, his voice rising. "This isn't justice. This is madness. Whatever happened in the past, it doesn't justify putting an innocent child in danger." Danielle's eyes flashed with anger. "You don't understand, do you? Isabel isn't innocent. She knew. She knew what our parents did to me, and she let it happen." "She was a child," Oliver countered, "just like you were. Whatever mistakes were made, they don't give you the right to hurt her. Or this baby." Danielle stepped closer, her expression softening briefly. "This isn't just about Isabel. It's about me, Oliver. About finally taking back control of my life." Oliver shook his head. "There's no control in destruction, Danielle. Let me help you. Let us help you." For a moment, Danielle seemed to waver, her resolve faltering. But before Oliver could say more, she stepped back, her face hardening again. "I'm sorry, Oliver," she said quietly, "but this is the only way." With that, she turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Oliver standing in the dimly lit hallway. The baby's cries continued, a haunting reminder of what was at stake. The faint cry of the baby lingered in Oliver's ears, echoing through the desolate hallways of the decrepit house. Every instinct screamed for him to kick down the door and rush to his son, but Danielle's haunting words held him in place. He stood frozen, his fists clenched at his sides as he battled the fury boiling inside him. Oliver turned sharply, rushing down the hallway in pursuit of Danielle. His heart pounded as his footsteps echoed through the empty house. The distant sound of her retreating footsteps was faint but unmistakable. "Danielle," he shouted, his voice raw with desperation. "This has to end now." No response. The silence that followed was oppressive, broken only by the creak of the old floorboards beneath his feet. Oliver pressed on, following the sound of a creaking door ahead. It led him down a narrow staircase, dimly lit by the faint glow of a single flickering bulb. The basement was a stark contrast to the rest of the house. Bare concrete walls, lined with metal shelves, a dim overhead light, casting long shadows. At the center stood Danielle, holding the baby close to her chest. Her eyes were wild, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her gaze as Oliver approached. "Danielle, please," Oliver said, his voice softer now. "Let's stop this before it gets worse. The baby doesn't deserve this." Danielle shook her head, tears streaming down her face. You don't get it, Oliver. This isn't just about Isabel. This is about me. I've been invisible my entire life, ignored, forgotten. This baby is my chance to matter. Oliver took a cautious step forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. You matter, Danielle. You always have. But this isn't the way to fix things. You're not invisible, and you're not alone. Let me help you. Danielle's grip on the baby tightened, and she took a step back. It's too late, Oliver. I've already gone too far. Isabel will never forgive me. She'll never let me be a part of her life. She will, Oliver said firmly, but only if you give her the chance. Let's end this, Danielle. For the baby. For all of us. A tense silence filled the room. Danielle's breaths were shallow and ragged as her gaze darted between Oliver and the baby. For a brief moment, the tension broke. Her shoulders sagged, and she let out a choked sob. But before Oliver could take another step, a loud crash shattered the fragile calm. The sound of shattering glass came from above, followed by the heavy thud of approaching footsteps. Danielle's eyes widened in panic, and she clutched the baby tighter. No, she whispered, backing away toward a hidden doorway. They are here. Who's here? Oliver demanded, his voice rising. What have you done, Danielle? Before she could answer, the door to the basement burst open, and two men stepped inside. They were rough-looking, their expressions cold and calculating. One of them glanced at Danielle with a smirk. You didn't think we'd let you keep the kid, did you? Danielle's face paled as she realized her mistake. I didn't call you, I swear. The taller man sneered, stepping closer. Doesn't matter. You owe us Danny, and we're here to collect. Oliver positioned himself between Danielle and the men, his jaw tightening. You're not taking him, he said, his voice steady despite the fear gripping him. Leave. Now. The shorter man chuckled, pulling a knife from his jacket. You've got guts, rich boy. But you're out of your league. Oliver's mind raced. He knew he couldn't overpower both men, but he couldn't let them take the baby. He glanced at Danielle, who stood frozen in fear. Danielle, Oliver said sharply, keeping his eyes on the men. If you want to make things right, now's your chance. Help me. She hesitated, her eyes flickering with indecision. Finally, with a shaky nod, she handed the baby to Oliver. Go, she whispered. I'll distract them. Oliver didn't need to be told twice. He took the baby and bolted for the stairs, cradling the tiny bundle against his chest. Behind him, Danielle shouted, drawing the men's attention away from his escape. The house was a labyrinth of dark hallways and creaking floors, but Oliver moved with purpose. The baby whimpered softly in his arms, and he murmured soothing words to calm him. It's okay, little one. I've got you. We're going to be okay. As he reached the front door, a loud crash from the basement sent a jolt of fear through him. He hesitated, torn between fleeing and going back for Danielle. Before he could decide, a shadow loomed in the doorway. It was the taller man, his face twisted in anger. You're not going anywhere, he growled, lunging toward Oliver. Oliver barely had time to react. He turned and ran toward the nearest window, using his shoulder to smash through the glass. The impact sent shards flying, but he kept the baby shielded, ignoring the pain as he landed on the ground outside. The cold night air hit him like a slap, but he didn't stop. He ran toward his car, his breaths ragged and his heart pounding. Behind him, the house loomed like a dark specter, its windows glowing faintly from the lights inside. As he reached the car, Oliver glanced back one last time. Danielle stood in the broken doorway, her figure silhouetted against the dim light. Their eyes met, and for a moment, she looked like the little girl she once was, lost and afraid. Go, she mouthed, her voice too faint to hear. Then she disappeared back into the house. The drive to safety was a blur. Oliver couldn't focus on anything but the baby in his arms and the haunting image of Danielle's face. By the time he reached the hospital, exhaustion had taken over, but he pushed forward, determined to get the baby to safety. Inside, the bright lights and sterile environment were a stark contrast to the chaos he had just escaped. Nurses rushed to his side, taking the baby from his arms and assuring him that he was in good hands. As Oliver sank into a chair in the waiting room, his mind replayed the events of the night. Danielle's words, the men's threats, the baby's cries. It all blurred together into a cacophony of fear and uncertainty. He didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear. The battle was far from over. Oliver sat in the hospital waiting room, his hands clasped tightly together, as his mind swirled with fear and anger. The baby was safe for now, receiving medical attention, but the events of the night haunted him. Danielle's betrayal, her cryptic words, and the shadowy figures pursuing her painted a picture of a deeper conspiracy than he had ever imagined. Yet amidst the chaos, one lead remained, the address scrawled on the old woman's belongings. Oliver stared at the crumpled paper in his hands as he drove through the quiet suburbs. The city lights faded behind him, replaced by dim street lamps and looming shadows cast by overgrown trees. The address led to the outskirts of town, where the houses became sparse and dilapidated, each one seeming more desolate than the last. Finally, he pulled up to the destination, an old two-story house with peeling paint and boarded-up windows. The lawn was overgrown, and a broken swing hung from a tree in the yard, creaking softly in the wind. The place looked abandoned, but Oliver knew better than to trust appearances. "This is it," he murmured, gripping the steering wheel tightly. He glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see one of Danielle's pursuers, but the road was empty. Time to end this. The front door creaked as Oliver pushed it open, the sound echoing through the hollow space. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. Faded wallpaper clung to the walls, and broken furniture was strewn across the floor. The faint scent of mildew and something metallic lingered, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. "Danielle," he called out, his voice low and cautious. There was no response. The only sound was the faint creak of the floorboards beneath his feet. Oliver moved carefully through the house, his eyes scanning every corner for signs of life. As he reached the living room, his heart skipped a beat. A faint light glowed under a door at the end of the hallway, barely visible through the darkness. He approached slowly, his breath shallow, as he pressed his ear to the door. Inside, he heard muffled voices, one sharp and commanding, the other pleading. The second voice sent a chill down his spine. Pushing the door open, Oliver stepped into a dimly lit room. Danielle stood in the center, clutching a bundle of papers, her back to him. Across from her, a man sat in an old armchair, his face obscured by the shadows. A handgun rested on the table beside him, its presence unmistakable. "Danielle!" Oliver's voice broke through the tense silence. Both figures turned to face him, Danielle's eyes wide with panic, while the man remained eerily calm. "Well, well," the man drawled, leaning back in his chair. "You must be Oliver, the devoted husband chasing after shadows." Oliver ignored him, focusing on Danielle. "What is this? What are you doing here?" Danielle's hands trembled as she held up the papers. "I didn't want this, Oliver. I didn't want any of this." "But he—" The man cut her off with a chuckle. "Careful, Danny. Don't go spilling all our secrets now." Oliver took a step forward, his fists clenched. "Who are you? And what do you want with my family?" The man tilted his head, his smile cold and calculating. Let's just say I'm someone who knows how to recognize an opportunity. Your wife's twin here thought she could outsmart me, but we both know that was never going to happen." Danielle looked away, her shoulders slumping under the weight of his words. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought I could protect the baby, but I was wrong." "Protect him?" Oliver's voice rose, disbelief etched into every word. "You kidnapped him, Danielle. You put his life in danger." "I had no choice," she shouted, her voice breaking. "He said he'd kill Isabel if I didn't do what he wanted. I thought, if I kept the baby, I could bargain for her safety." The man laughed, a low, menacing sound. "Touching. But let's be honest, Danny. You were just as eager to settle your score with Isabel as I was. Don't act like you're innocent." Oliver's mind raced as the pieces began to fall into place. This wasn't just about jealousy or revenge. This was something far darker. "What do you want?" he asked again, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. The man leaned forward, his smile fading. "Simple. I want what Isabel stole from me. And if I can't have it, then I'll make sure she pays." Before Oliver could respond, Danielle moved suddenly, throwing the bundle of papers at the man. The distraction was enough. Oliver lunged forward, grabbing the gun from the table. The man cursed, scrambling to his feet, but Oliver leveled the weapon at him, his hands steady. "Stay back," Oliver warned, his voice firm. "This ends now." The man raised his hands, his expression a mix of anger and amusement. "You think this is over? You're more naive than I thought." Ignoring him, Oliver turned to Danielle. "Where's the baby?" Her eyes filled with tears as she pointed to a corner of the room where a small crib sat hidden in the shadows. Oliver rushed to it, his heart pounding. Inside, the baby lay sleeping, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Relief flooded through Oliver as he gently lifted the baby into his arms. "You're safe now," he whispered, holding him close. But the moment was short-lived. The man seized the opportunity to charge at Oliver, knocking the gun from his hands. The two men grappled, their movements clumsy and desperate. Danielle screamed, backing into the corner. As the struggle intensified, Oliver fought with everything he had, his mind focused on protecting the baby. With a surge of adrenaline, he managed to overpower the man, pinning him to the ground. "Get out," Oliver growled, his voice low and dangerous. "If I ever see you near my family again, you won't walk away." The man sneered but didn't resist. "This isn't over," he spat, before scrambling to his feet and disappearing into the night. As the house fell silent once more, Oliver turned to Danielle. She was trembling, her face pale, as she clutched the edge of the table for support. "You have to tell me everything," Oliver said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "No more lies, Danielle. No more secrets." She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I will. But first, we need to get out of here. It's not safe." With the baby in his arms and Danielle following closely behind, Oliver left the house, stepping into the cool night air. The ordeal was far from over, but for the first time he felt a glimmer of hope. The truth was within reach, and he wouldn't stop until he had it. The old house loomed behind them, as Oliver carried the baby, and Danielle followed close, her steps uneven. The tension between them was palpable, and the cool night air did little to quell the storm brewing within. They had escaped the immediate danger, but the weight of unanswered questions pressed heavily on Oliver's mind. "We need to talk," he said, his voice firm as they reached his car. "No more running. No more cryptic remarks. If you want any chance of redemption, Danielle, you'll tell me the truth, now." Danielle glanced at the baby in Oliver's arms, her expression softening. "I will. she whispered. But not here. Let's get somewhere safe first. Oliver hesitated, every instinct telling him not to trust her. But the baby's soft cooing in his arms reminded him of what was truly at stake. Fine, he said, opening the car door. But once we're safe, you're telling me everything. The drive was tense and silent, the only sound the occasional rustle of the baby's blanket as he shifted in his sleep. Oliver's grip on the steering wheel was tight, his knuckles white as he navigated the dark, empty streets. Danielle sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Finally, they arrived at a small motel on the outskirts of town. Oliver parked the car and turned to Danielle. Stay here with the baby. I'll get us a room. Danielle nodded, her expression unreadable. As Oliver stepped out of the car, he felt the weight of the night pressing down on him. He had faced danger before in his life, but nothing had prepared him for the emotional toll of this ordeal. The room was modest, but clean, with 2 twin beds and a small table. Oliver set the baby down on one of the beds, carefully tucking him in with the blanket. The child stirred but didn't wake, his tiny face peaceful, despite the chaos surrounding him. Danielle stood by the door, her arms wrapped around herself, as if trying to shield herself from the weight of her own guilt. Oliver turned to face her, his eyes cold and questioning. Start talking, he said. I want the whole truth, Danielle. No more games. She took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the floor. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I never meant for things to go so far. Danielle's confession came slowly, each word heavy with emotion. She spoke of her childhood, of being separated from Isabel after their parents' divorce. Isabel had gone to live with their wealthy mother, while Danielle was left with their father, struggling to make ends meet. The resentment had festered over the years, growing into a deep-seated hatred, as Danielle watched Isabel's life flourish from afar. When I found out Isabel was pregnant, Danielle said, her voice shaking, I saw a chance to take back what I'd lost. I thought if I took the baby, I could make her feel the same pain I did, losing someone she loved. Oliver's jaw tightened, anger bubbling beneath the surface. You used an innocent child as a pawn in your twisted game of revenge. Do you even hear yourself? Danielle's eyes filled with tears. I know it was wrong. I know I hurt her. And you, but I thought it would fill the emptiness inside me. Instead, it only made it worse. Before Oliver could respond, the sound of tires screeching outside shattered the tense silence. He rushed to the window, his heart racing, as he saw a black SUV pull into the parking lot. The same men who had been pursuing Danielle earlier stepped out, their expressions cold and determined. They found us, Oliver said, his voice low. Stay here with the baby, lock the door, and don't let anyone in. Danielle's face went pale. Oliver, you can't face them alone. I don't have a choice, he cut her off. Just do as I say. Stepping outside, Oliver squared his shoulders, his mind racing as he approached the men. What do you want? He demanded, his voice steady, despite the fear coursing through him. One of the men stepped forward, his gaze cold and calculating. You have something that belongs to us, he said. Hand over the baby, and we'll let you walk away. Oliver's fists clenched. You're not taking him, he said firmly. I don't know who you are or what your game is, but this child isn't yours. The man smirked. Brave words. Let's see how far they get you. The confrontation quickly escalated into chaos. One of the men lunged at Oliver, and he barely managed to sidestep the attack, using his adrenaline-fueled strength to push the assailant to the ground. Another man joined the fray, and Oliver fought desperately, his mind focused on protecting the baby and Danielle. Inside the motel room, Danielle watched through the window, her hands trembling as she held the baby close. She knew she had caused this, and the weight of her guilt was almost unbearable. "I have to do something," she whispered, her eyes darting to the drawer where Oliver had hidden his phone. In the midst of the struggle, a sudden loud crash drew everyone's attention. Danielle stood in the doorway, holding a fire extinguisher she had found in the motel room. Her eyes blazed with determination as she faced the men. "Leave us alone," she shouted, her voice shaking but resolute. The men hesitated, caught off guard by her unexpected bravery. Oliver took advantage of the distraction, delivering a well-aimed punch that sent one of them reeling. The remaining attackers exchanged uncertain glances before retreating to their SUV and speeding away into the night. As the dust settled, Oliver turned to Danielle, his chest heaving with exertion. "What were you thinking?" he demanded. "You could have gotten yourself killed." Danielle looked down, clutching the baby tightly. "I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. Not after everything I've done." Oliver's anger softened as he saw the pain in her eyes. "This isn't over," he said. "But for now, we need to get somewhere safe." Back in the room, Oliver sat on the edge of the bed, the baby sleeping soundly in his arms. Danielle sat across from him, her face etched with exhaustion and regret. "Thank you," she said softly, "for protecting him, for protecting me." Oliver nodded, his expression unreadable. "This isn't about gratitude, Danielle. It's about doing what's right. For him and for Isabel." As the first light of dawn broke through the curtains, Oliver felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, he believed they might find a way forward. The sterile hospital corridor felt endless. As Oliver walked, the faint hum of machines and muted whispers of medical staff, creating a tense, heavy atmosphere. In his arms, the baby stirred, his small fingers clutching at the fabric of Oliver's shirt, as though seeking comfort. The weight of the night's events bore down on Oliver, but he pushed it aside. This was a moment for answers, no matter how painful they might be. Isabel lay in the hospital bed, her face pale but her breathing steady. A tangle of IV lines and monitors surrounded her, their rhythmic beeps a fragile reassurance. She stirred as Oliver entered, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment, they softened with relief at the sight of him. But when her gaze landed on the baby in his arms, they filled with trepidation. "Oliver," she whispered, her voice hoarse, "you found him." "I did," he replied, his tone steady but laced with an unspoken demand for truth. "And now, I need you to tell me everything, Isabel. No more secrets." Isabel's eyes darted to the baby, then back to Oliver. She sat up with some effort, her hands trembling as she reached out. "Please, let me hold him." Oliver hesitated but relented, carefully placing the baby in her arms. She cradled him close, tears spilling down her cheeks as she whispered, "My son, my beautiful boy." "Isabel," Oliver said, his voice firmer now. "Who is Danielle, and what does she have to do with all this?" The mention of her twin sister's name made Isabel flinch. She drew a shaky breath, her gaze fixed on the baby, as though drawing strength from him. "Danny and we were inseparable once. But life wasn't fair to her." Isabel began her story, her words halting at first, but gaining momentum as she unraveled the tangled threads of her past. She spoke of a childhood marked by stark contrasts. She, the favored daughter who stayed with their wealthy mother, and Danielle, sent to live with their struggling father. The separation bred resentment, and over the years, their relationship deteriorated. "I tried to reconnect with her," Isabel said, her voice breaking. But every time I reached out, she pushed me away. Then, when I found out I was pregnant, she paused, tears streaming down her face. She showed up out of nowhere. At first, I thought it was a chance to mend things. But Danny, she was different, angry. She said I didn't deserve the life I had. Oliver's jaw tightened. So, she took the baby to punish you? Isabel nodded, clutching the child tighter. She said she wanted me to feel the pain of losing someone I loved. I thought I could handle it, that I could protect our son. But I was wrong. The door creaked open, and Ethan Blake, the private investigator Oliver had hired, stepped in. His expression was grim as he handed Oliver a manila folder. "I've got the answers you've been looking for," he said. "But they're not easy to hear." Oliver opened the folder, his eyes scanning the pages. They revealed a trail of evidence linking Danielle to the baby's disappearance and the staged abandonment that had led Oliver to find him in the alley. The final page was a DNA test, confirming what Oliver had begun to suspect. The baby was indeed his and Isabel's biological child. He looked up at Isabel, a mixture of relief and anger in his eyes. "Why didn't you tell me about Danny sooner? Why did you let me believe there was nothing in your past that could haunt us like this?" Isabel's shoulders sagged under the weight of his words. "I was ashamed," she admitted. "I thought if I ignored it, if I kept her out of our lives, she couldn't hurt us. But I was wrong, Oliver. I see that now." Oliver's voice softened, but the edge of frustration remained. "Isabel, we're supposed to be a team. How can we face things like this if you don't trust me enough to tell me the truth?" "I do trust you," Isabel said, her voice trembling. "But I was scared. I didn't want you to think less of me." Oliver sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't think less of you, Isabel. But this could have torn us apart. We need to be stronger than that." Before they could continue, the baby let out a soft cry, breaking the tension in the room. Isabel rocked him gently, her eyes filled with a mixture of love and guilt. "He's what matters now," she said. "Our son. We have to protect him." Oliver nodded, his resolve hardening. "We will. But first, I need to confront Danny. She has to answer for what she's done." "I don't think she ever wanted to truly hurt him," Isabel said quietly. She's broken, Oliver. And she doesn't know how to fix herself." That doesn't excuse her actions," Oliver replied. "She put our son in danger, Isabel. She put all of us in danger." Later that day, Danielle sat in an interrogation room at the police station, her hands cuffed to the table. Her usually defiant demeanor had crumbled, leaving her looking small and defeated. Oliver entered, his expression unreadable, as he took a seat across from her. "You have a lot to answer for," he said, his tone cold. Danielle looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed. "I know," she said, "and I'm ready to face the consequences. But please, Oliver, believe me when I say I never wanted to hurt the baby." "Then why?" Oliver demanded. "Why take him? Why put him in danger?" Danielle's voice broke as she replied, "Because I wanted Isabel to feel what I felt. The pain of losing someone you love. But it didn't work. It only made me realize how empty I've become." As the conversation continued, Danielle's regret became evident. She offered information about the baby's time in her care, details that would help the authorities close the case. But her confession did little to ease the anger and pain Oliver felt. "You've caused so much damage," he said, standing to leave. "Not just to Isabel, but to yourself. I hope you use this time to figure out how to fix what's left of your life." Danielle nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for everything. Back at the hospital, Oliver returned to Isabel's side. She looked up at him, her eyes questioning. Did she say anything? She's sorry, Oliver said simply. But Sra doesn't erase what she's done. Isabel nodded, her expression somber. No, it doesn't. But maybe it's a start. As Oliver sat beside her, watching their son sleep, he felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be difficult, but together, they could begin to rebuild. The quiet hum of hospital machinery filled the room, underscoring the gravity of the moment. Isabel sat propped up in her bed, her pallor a stark contrast to the vivid blue blanket wrapped around their baby boy. Oliver stood by the window, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, his mind spinning with the weight of the decision he had to make. Oliver? Isabel called softly, her voice trembling. What's wrong? He turned, his face shadowed by exhaustion and fear. The doctors, he began, his voice breaking. They've said the baby's condition is worsening. His breathing is unstable, and time is running out to perform the transplant. Isabel's grip tightened around the baby, her knuckles whitening. But he's just a baby. Is it safe for him? Oliver sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. It's a risk, a huge one. But without the transplant, you might not make it, Isabel. And if we wait too long, we could lose you both. The enormity of the situation hung between them like a storm cloud. Isabel looked down at the baby, his tiny fingers curling around hers. Oliver, she whispered, her voice filled with anguish. How can I ask you to choose? How can I ask you to put our baby through this? You're not asking, Oliver said firmly, stepping closer. This isn't a choice I want to make. But I can't lose you, Isabel. I can't lose either of you. Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head. What if it's too much for him? What if we make the wrong decision? Oliver knelt beside the bed, taking her free hand in his. We don't have the luxury of certainty. All we have is hope. Hope that he's stronger than we think. Hope that you both make it through this. The door opened, and Dr. Foster entered, her expression serious but compassionate. Mr. and Mrs. Grayson, she began. I know this is an impossible situation, but we need to act quickly. The baby's health is deteriorating, and if we delay much longer, we'll lose the opportunity to proceed with the transplant. Doctor, Isabel said, her voice trembling. Isn't there another way? Something less risky for him? Dr. Foster sighed, her gaze softening. I understand your fears, Mrs. Grayson, but the transplant is your best chance for survival. And while it's true the baby is fragile, we've had success in similar cases. The odds aren't ideal, but they're not insurmountable. Oliver turned to the doctor, his jaw tight. And if we don't do this, what happens then? Dr. Foster's silence was answer enough. Without the transplant, she said finally, we'll lose Isabel. And the baby's condition will likely continue to decline. The room fell silent, the weight of her words pressing down on them. Isabel looked at Oliver, her eyes filled with fear and determination. Oliver, she said softly, if it comes down to it, save him. Save our son. No, Oliver said sharply, his voice firm. I won't accept that. We fight for both of you. We do this together, Isabel. All three of us. Dr. Foster stepped forward, her expression resolute. I'll give you a moment to decide, but we need to know soon. Time is of the essence. As the doctor left, Oliver turned back to Isabel, his hand resting on her cheek. We've been through too much to give up now. I believe in him, Isabel. I believe in you. We'll make it through this. Hours later, the hospital was a flurry of activity as preparations for the transplant began. The baby, swaddled in a soft blanket, was placed in an incubator under the watchful eyes of the neonatal team. Isabel was prepped in a nearby operating room, her face pale but resolute. Oliver stood in the hallway between the two rooms, torn between his wife and child. He watched through the glass as the medical teams worked, his heart aching with every passing second. "Please," he whispered to no one in particular, his voice breaking. "Please, let them both survive. I can't do this without them." Inside the operating room, Isabel closed her eyes, focusing on the sound of her breathing. Her mind drifted to memories of happier times, her wedding day, the first time she told Oliver she was pregnant, the joy they'd shared before everything fell apart. "Hold on, little one," she whispered to herself. "Mommy's going to fight for you." In the adjacent room, the baby lay still, his tiny chest rising and falling with labored breaths. The doctors and nurses moved with precision, their faces masks of focus and determination. The hours dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. Oliver paced the hallway, his every step echoing in the silence. His mind raced with what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. But he clung desperately to the hope that they would make it through. Finally, Dr. Foster emerged, her scrubs stained but her expression calm. Oliver rushed to her, his heart pounding. "Doctor, are they—" "The procedure went as well as we could have hoped," she said, a small smile breaking through her professional demeanor. "Both Isabel and the baby are stable, but the next 24 hours will be critical. We'll be monitoring them closely." Relief washed over Oliver like a tidal wave. He pressed a hand to his chest, his eyes closing as he whispered, "Thank you." Later that night, Oliver sat by Isabel's bedside, holding her hand as she slept. The baby was in the neonatal intensive care unit, recovering under the careful watch of the medical team. Oliver's exhaustion was palpable, but he refused to leave either of them. As Isabel stirred awake, her eyes fluttering open, Oliver leaned closer. "You're okay," he said softly. "The transplant went well?" She smiled weakly, her hand tightening around his. "And the baby?" "He's stable," Oliver replied, his voice thick with emotion. "He's a fighter, just like his mom." They sat in silence for a moment, the gravity of what they'd endured settling over them. Isabel looked up at Oliver, her eyes glistening with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not giving up on us." "I could never give up on you," Oliver said, his voice steady. "You're my everything, Isabel, you and our son. And now, we have a second chance, a chance to start over." As they sat together, the hum of the machines around them, a quiet backdrop, Oliver felt a renewed sense of hope. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he allowed himself to believe that they could win. The sterile scent of the hospital lingered in the air, blending with the quiet hums of machines and hurried footsteps of the medical team. Oliver stood behind the thick glass of the observation room, his hands pressed against the barrier as he watched the most critical moment of his life unfold. Inside the operating room, Isabel lay unconscious, her fragile body surrounded by the medical team. Her face, pale and serene, was a stark contrast to the turmoil in Oliver's heart. In another room, the baby, his son, lay in an incubator, his tiny form dwarfed by the equipment meant to save his life. Oliver clenched his fists, his thoughts racing. He felt trapped, helpless, as though he were a spectator in a battle. He desperately wanted to fight himself. "Please," he murmured under his breath, his voice trembling. "Please, let them both survive." Dr. Foster entered the observation room, her face calm yet resolute. "Mr. Grayson," she said gently, "everything is proceeding as planned. The bone marrow extraction is delicate, but the baby is responding well to the anesthesia. Oliver turned to her, his eyes filled with desperation. And Isabel? How is she holding up? Dr. Foster's expression softened. She's stable, but it's a delicate balance. We're doing everything we can. As the procedure continued, time seemed to stretch endlessly. Every minute felt like an hour. Every beep of the monitors, a reminder of how precarious their situation was. Oliver's mind drifted to memories of Isabel's laughter, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about their future, the joy they'd shared when they first learned they would become parents. I promised you, he whispered to himself, his voice breaking. I promised I'd protect you both. In the operating room, the doctors worked with precision, extracting the marrow needed for Isabel's transplant. The baby's vitals fluctuated slightly, causing a wave of tension to ripple through the team. Keep an eye on his oxygen levels, one of the nurses instructed, her tone calm but urgent. Meanwhile, Isabel's body began to receive the marrow. Her monitors beeped steadily, a sound that provided a sliver of reassurance amidst the chaos. Yet the doctors knew the real battle lay ahead, how her body would respond in the hours and days to come. Outside, Oliver paced the hallway, unable to sit still. He glanced at his phone, the screen blank, except for the time that seemed to move too slowly. Every second felt like a lifetime. Nurses passed by, their expressions kind but distant, as though they understood his agony but had no words to ease it. He finally sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. What else can I do? He murmured. The weight of his decisions pressed heavily on his shoulders, a reminder that no matter how much wealth or power he had, there were things he couldn't control. Hours later, Dr. Foster emerged from the operating room, her scrubs stained but her demeanor calm. Oliver leapt to his feet, his heart pounding. Doctor? He asked, his voice raw with emotion. Are they okay? She gave a small nod, a reassuring smile playing on her lips. The transplant was successful. Both Isabel and the baby are stable, but the next 48 hours will be critical. We'll be monitoring them closely. Relief flooded through Oliver, his legs nearly giving out beneath him. He gripped the edge of a nearby chair for support, his eyes filling with tears. Thank you, he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you for saving them. Later that evening, Oliver sat by Isabel's bedside, her hand clasped tightly in his. The room was quiet, save for the soft beeping of the monitors. Isabel's breathing was shallow but steady, her face more peaceful than it had been in days. I'm here, Oliver whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. We made it through this, Isabel. You and the baby. You're both going to be okay. Her eyelids fluttered, and she let out a soft sigh. Though she didn't wake, Oliver took her reaction as a sign of hope, a reminder that she was still fighting. In the neonatal unit, the baby rested in his incubator, his tiny chest rising and falling in a rhythm that was both fragile and miraculous. Oliver visited him, his hands trembling as he placed them against the clear barrier. You're so strong, he murmured, his voice breaking. Stronger than I ever could have imagined. You saved your mother's life, little one. You're a hero. As he stood there, watching his son, a sense of awe and gratitude washed over him. He had fought tooth and nail to bring his family to this moment, and though the journey wasn't over, he allowed himself a moment of peace. The following morning, Isabel woke slowly, her eyes adjusting to the soft light filtering into the room. She turned her head, her gaze meeting Oliver's. You stayed, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Of course I stayed, Oliver replied, his tone firm but gentle. I'm not going anywhere. Tears welled in Isabel's eyes as she squeezed his hand. The baby? He's doing well, Oliver assured her. He's recovering, just like you. She closed her eyes for a moment, a tear slipping down her cheek. I thought I'd lost everything, she whispered. But you never gave up. Oliver leaned closer, his hand brushing against her cheek. We don't give up, Isabel. Not on each other. Not on our family. As the day wore on, Isabel grew stronger, her color returning, and her energy slowly building. The doctors continued to monitor both her and the baby, their updates providing cautious optimism. Oliver remained at their sides, dividing his time between Isabel's room and the neonatal unit. Each visit to his son filled him with renewed hope, a reminder of how far they'd come. We've got this, he told Isabel one evening as they sat together. The worst is behind us. She smiled faintly, her hand resting on her stomach. I believe you, she said softly. For the first time in a long time, I believe we'll be okay. The sunlight filtering through the hospital window carried a warmth that felt foreign yet soothing. It was as though the universe had conspired to grant a reprieve from the storm that had ravaged Oliver's life in recent weeks. Isabel sat propped up in bed, her complexion still pale, but radiant with newfound vitality. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic, yet it felt comforting, a space that had borne witness to their shared resilience. Oliver entered, carrying a tray with a warm cup of tea and a small plate of fresh fruit. He set it down on the side table, his gaze never leaving Isabel's face. Good morning, he said softly, his voice brimming with affection. Good morning, Isabel replied, her lips curving into a faint smile. It's strange. I feel lighter, as if a weight I didn't even know I carried has been lifted. Oliver nodded, his expression tender but tinged with concern. You've been through more than most people could bear, Isabel. It's okay to feel a little unsteady. The sound of soft footsteps echoed in the hallway, and a nurse appeared at the door. Mrs. Grayson, how are you feeling today? She asked, her tone warm and encouraging. I'm getting stronger, Isabel said, glancing at Oliver with gratitude. Thanks to him. And our baby. The nurse smiled and jotted notes on her clipboard. Your progress is remarkable. We're optimistic about your recovery. As for your son, he's stable and responding well. Would you like to see him today? Isabel's face lit up, her eyes glistening with tears. Yes, more than anything. As they wheeled Isabel into the neonatal unit, Oliver walked beside her, one hand resting gently on her shoulder. The sight of their baby in the incubator brought a flood of emotions. His tiny chest rose and fell with each breath, a testament to his quiet strength. Isabel reached out, her hand trembling, as she placed it on the clear barrier. He's so small, she whispered, her voice breaking. But he's fighting, isn't he? He's a Grayson, Oliver replied, his tone firm yet tender. He's got your strength, Isabel. For the first time in days, Isabel allowed herself to believe that their family might truly heal. I want to hold him, she said, her voice filled with longing. The nurse gently lifted the baby from the incubator, wrapping him in a soft blanket before placing him in Isabel's arms. The moment he nestled against her, Isabel let out a soft sob. He's perfect, she whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead. Later that evening, as Isabel rested, Oliver sat in the hospital lounge, his thoughts heavy with reflection. He reached into his pocket and retrieved the letter he'd received earlier that day. A letter from Danny. The neat handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable, and for a moment he hesitated. Finally, he unfolded the paper and began to read. Dear Oliver, by now, You've likely pieced together the reasons behind my actions. I won't justify the pain I caused, because there is no excuse for it. I was consumed by bitterness and envy, and in my desperation, I made choices that can never be undone. But I see things clearly now. Isabel's forgiveness, though undeserved, has given me a chance to reflect. Your family's strength in the face of my chaos has shown me what I've been missing all along: love, resilience, and grace. I don't expect redemption, nor do I seek pity. But I do hope, in time, you can see that I'm trying to change. I've started therapy here in prison, and for the first time in years, I feel a glimmer of hope. Thank you for taking care of Isabel and the baby. They are lucky to have you, just as you're lucky to have them. Treasure that, Oliver. Never let it slip away. Sincerely, Danny. Oliver folded the letter, his emotions conflicted. He couldn't ignore the pain Danny had caused, but her words carried a sincerity that touched something deep within him. He knew Isabel would want to see the letter, and despite his reservations, he decided to show it to her. Back in the hospital room, Isabel was awake, cradling the baby as she hummed softly. Oliver entered quietly, his heart swelling at the sight of them together. "Isabel," he said, his voice low, "there's something I need to share with you." She looked up, her expression curious but calm. "What is it?" Oliver handed her the letter. As she read, her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of something deeper. "She's trying," Isabel said softly, her voice trembling. "After everything, she's trying." Oliver sat beside her, placing a comforting hand on her back. "Do you think you can forgive her?" Isabel nodded slowly, her gaze distant. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. But I can't hold on to hate, Oliver. It would only poison the love we're rebuilding." In the weeks that followed, Isabel and the baby continued to grow stronger. Their home became a sanctuary, a place of healing and love. Oliver took time away from work to focus on his family, learning to appreciate the simple, quiet moments that had once eluded him. One evening, as they sat together in the nursery, Isabel spoke. "I've been writing to Danny." Oliver looked at her, surprised but not shocked. "And?" "She's remorseful, Oliver, truly. She wants to make amends, even from where she is now. I think I want to visit her." Oliver hesitated, then nodded. "If that's what you need, I'll support you." The Grayson estate, once silent and heavy with unspoken grief, now hummed with a new rhythm of life. The faint cry of their baby echoed softly through the halls, followed by the soothing tones of Isabel's voice. Morning sunlight poured through the large windows, casting warm golden streaks across the living room. The house, which had felt like a cold and empty mausoleum just weeks ago, now radiated warmth and promise. Oliver stood at the doorway of the nursery, watching Isabel gently rock their son. She looked radiant, her once frail frame now stronger, her smile reaching her eyes in a way he hadn't seen in years. She turned and caught his gaze, her lips curving into a smile that made his heart swell. "Good morning," she said softly, adjusting the blanket around the baby. "Good morning," Oliver replied, stepping into the room. He leaned down to kiss her on the forehead, then gently stroked the baby's cheek. "How's Liam doing?" Isabel chuckled, her voice light. "He's growing stronger every day. I think he's going to be a fighter, just like his parents." As the day unfolded, the Graysons prepared to bring Liam home officially. The nursery had been a sanctuary, but now it was time for the baby to explore the rest of the house. Oliver carried Liam carefully, his large hands cradling the tiny bundle, while Isabel walked beside him. They entered the living room, where a playmat had been set up near the fireplace. The sight was a far cry from the sterile, impersonal atmosphere that had once defined the space. Now, It was filled with toys, books, and signs of a life being rebuilt. Oliver placed Liam gently on the mat, watching as the baby's tiny fists waved in the air. Isabel knelt beside him, her hand resting on the mat for support. "He's going to love it here," she said, her voice filled with hope. Oliver nodded, his gaze fixed on his son. "This is what I've always dreamed of, Isabel. A home filled with love, laughter, and the pitter-patter of little feet." As the afternoon wore on, Isabel decided it was time for Liam's first outing into the garden. The sprawling estate, with its manicured lawns and blooming flowers, was the perfect place to introduce their son to the world beyond the nursery. Oliver carried Liam, while Isabel held his hand. They walked through the garden, stopping by the rose bushes Isabel had tended before her illness. "Do you remember when we planted these?" she asked, her voice tinged with nostalgia. Oliver smiled. "Of course. You insisted on doing it yourself, even though I offered to hire a gardener. You said they wouldn't bloom the same if you didn't plant them with love." Isabel laughed, a sound that seemed to make the flowers bloom brighter. "And I was right, wasn't I? Look at them now." They sat on a bench near the fountain, the gentle trickle of water adding to the serene atmosphere. Liam was cradled in Isabel's arms, his tiny fingers grasping at the air. Oliver watched them, his heart full. "I never thought we'd have this," he admitted, his voice quiet. "There were moments when I thought we'd lost everything." Isabel reached for his hand, her touch grounding him. "But we didn't, Oliver. We fought for this, for Liam, for us. And now, we have a second chance." Later that evening, the Graysons gathered in the dining room for a quiet family dinner. The table, once used for formal gatherings and business meetings, now bore signs of their new life. A baby bottle sat beside Oliver's plate, and a soft blanket was draped over Isabel's chair. As they ate, Isabel brought up the idea of hosting a small celebration. "Liam's homecoming deserves to be celebrated," she said, her eyes shining with excitement. "Nothing extravagant, just close friends and family." Oliver nodded. "I think that's a wonderful idea. It's time we let joy back into this house." They spent the evening planning, their laughter filling the room. It was a stark contrast to the silence that had once loomed over their meals, and Oliver couldn't help but feel grateful for the transformation. The day of the celebration arrived, and the Grayson estate buzzed with activity. Close friends and family filled the living room, their conversations blending into a warm hum. Isabel, holding Liam, moved gracefully through the crowd, her joy infectious. Oliver stood near the fireplace, watching the scene unfold. He spotted Ethan Blake, the private investigator who had played a crucial role in their journey. Oliver approached him, extending a hand. "Ethan," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I can't thank you enough for everything you've done for us." Ethan shook his hand, a smile tugging at his lips. "You don't owe me anything, Oliver. Watching your family heal is thanks enough." As the celebration wound down, Isabel took a moment to reflect. She sat on the balcony overlooking the garden, Liam asleep in her arms. Oliver joined her, a blanket draped over his arm. "You were right," Isabel said, her voice soft. "This feels like a new beginning." Oliver sat beside her, wrapping the blanket around them both. "It is, Isabel. We've been through the fire, and we've come out stronger." They sat in comfortable silence, the stars above casting a gentle light on their faces. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, they could breathe without the weight of uncertainty. The morning dawned crisp and clear, sunlight pouring through the windows of the Grayson estate. Oliver stood by the fireplace, staring into the glowing embers. A mixture of emotions swirled within him: relief, gratitude, and a lingering unease. Today, he and Isabel were preparing for something that neither of them had anticipated, visiting Donnie in prison. It had been weeks since the fire and the arrest that followed. Donnie had been charged with several crimes, including endangering the life of a minor and arson. Despite the chaos she had caused, Isabel had pushed for leniency. Donnie's willingness to provide information about Liam's abduction and her cooperation with authorities had prompted the court to consider a reduced sentence. "Are you sure about this?" Oliver asked Isabel as they prepared to leave. She adjusted her scarf, her movements deliberate and calm. "Yes, I'm sure. She's my sister, Oliver. As much as she's hurt us, I can't let her rot in that cell without trying to help her heal." Oliver nodded, his admiration for Isabel's compassion growing with each passing day. "I'll be with you every step of the way." The prison was a stark contrast to the warmth of their home. Its cold, gray walls loomed like a fortress of forgotten souls. Isabel clutched Oliver's hand as they passed through security, her determination unwavering despite the weight of the moment. When they were finally led to the visitation room, Danny was already waiting. She sat on the other side of a thick pane of glass, her expression guarded. Her once vibrant features were drawn, her eyes hollow from weeks of confinement. Isabel picked up the receiver, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Danny." Danny's gaze softened slightly. "I didn't think you'd come." "I had to," Isabel replied. "We need to talk, Danny. About everything." The conversation began, with long silences, punctuated by hesitant words. Danny admitted her resentment, the years of feeling abandoned and unloved, festering into a toxic jealousy. She confessed to orchestrating Liam's abduction, hoping it would force Isabel to face her past. "I hated you," Danny said, her voice breaking. "I thought you had everything, love, wealth, a perfect life, while I had nothing." Isabel's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained calm. "Danny, I didn't know. If I had, I would have done something. You're my sister. Oh, I would have fought for you." Danny shook her head, guilt etched into her features. "I was too blinded by my anger to see that. And now, I've destroyed everything." "No, you haven't," Isabel said firmly. "You've hurt us, yes, but you've also helped us. Without you, I might never have seen Liam again. That counts for something." The conversation shifted to a more hopeful tone. Isabel extended a branch of forgiveness, telling Danny that redemption was possible, even from within the confines of a prison. "I've written you a letter," Isabel said, sliding an envelope through the small slot. "It's everything I've wanted to say, but couldn't find the words for today. I hope you'll read it and think about what comes next." Danny accepted the letter with trembling hands, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, Isabel. But thank you." As their time ended, Isabel placed a hand on the glass, her gaze unwavering. "You're still my sister, Danny, and I'll always hope for the best for you." Back at home, Isabel and Oliver sat together in the living room, reflecting on the visit. The air between them was heavy with unspoken thoughts. "Do you think she can change?" Oliver asked, his tone thoughtful. "I think she wants to," Isabel replied. "And that's a start." Oliver wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "You're an incredible woman, Isabel. Your ability to forgive, it's inspiring." Isabel smiled faintly, leaning into him. "Forgiveness doesn't erase the pain, but it helps us move forward. And that's what we need, to keep moving forward." A few weeks later, Isabel received a letter from Danny. It was filled with apologies, gratitude, and a promise to change. Danny expressed her intention to use her time in prison to better herself, to study, and to find a purpose beyond her resentment. The letter brought a sense of closure to Isabel. She shared it with Oliver, who read it carefully before nodding. "She's trying," he said, "and that's more than we could have hoped for." "Yes," Isabel agreed. "It's a start." The first rays of the morning sun bathed the Grayson estate in a warm, golden glow. The sprawling gardens were alive with color, from the blooming roses to the vibrant green grass. Birds sang in the trees, their melodies blending harmoniously with the gentle rustling of the wind. Inside the house, the atmosphere was one of quiet joy and anticipation. Oliver stood in the kitchen, wearing an apron over his tailored shirt, carefully placing candles on a small cake. Each candle represented a milestone, a moment of triumph for his family. Today was Liam's first birthday, a day he never thought they would see after the whirlwind year they had endured. "Perfect," Oliver murmured, stepping back to admire his work. From the living room, Isabel's laughter echoed, light and free. She was playing with Liam, who giggled uncontrollably as she waved a colorful stuffed animal in front of him. The sound brought a smile to Oliver's face, filling him with gratitude. Oliver carried the cake into the living room, where Isabel and Liam were sitting on a plush rug, surrounded by toys. Isabel looked up, her eyes sparkling with joy. "Is this the masterpiece you've been working on all morning?" she teased, nodding toward the cake. "Only the best for our little guy," Oliver replied with a grin. He set the cake on the coffee table, and they both leaned in to help Liam blow out the single candle. Liam clapped his tiny hands, clearly enjoying the attention, even if he didn't fully understand the significance of the moment. "Happy birthday, buddy," Oliver said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "You've given us more joy than I ever thought possible." After the small celebration, the three of them sat together on the couch, enjoying the calm of the morning. Isabel cradled Liam in her arms, gently rocking him as he nibbled on a piece of cake. "It feels surreal, doesn't it?" Isabel said, her voice quiet. "To be here, to have him in our arms, to be okay." Oliver nodded, his gaze fixed on Liam. "It does. There were so many moments when I thought we wouldn't make it, when I thought I'd lose both of you. But now, looking at him, looking at you, I know it was all worth it." Isabel reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "You were our anchor, Oliver. You fought for us when I couldn't. I'll never forget that." "And you gave me a reason to fight," Oliver replied. "Both of you did." Later that afternoon, Oliver and Isabel took Liam outside to the garden. They laid out a blanket under a large oak tree, its branches providing just enough shade. Liam crawled across the blanket, his tiny hands exploring the grass with curiosity. "This is the life I always dreamed of," Isabel said, leaning against Oliver. "Simple, peaceful, surrounded by love." Oliver wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her closer. "It's the life we fought for, and I'll protect it with everything I have." As they watched Liam attempt to take a few wobbly steps, both parents burst into laughter and applause. The sight was a reminder of resilience, of the strength it took to get to this point. That evening, as the sun set and the family settled inside, a letter arrived addressed to Isabel. Recognizing the handwriting, Isabel's heart skipped a beat. It was from Danny. She opened it carefully, her hands trembling slightly, and began to read aloud to Oliver. "Dear Isabel, I've been doing a lot of thinking here about my choices, my actions, and the pain I caused. I can't undo what I've done, and I know there's no way to make it right. But I want you to know that I'm trying. For the first time in my life, I'm trying to be better. Your forgiveness gave me something I didn't think I deserved. Hope. It's a small light, but it's enough to guide me now. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to. With love and gratitude, Danny. Tears filled Isabel's eyes as she folded the letter. She's trying, she said softly. That's all I could ever hope for. That night, after Liam had been put to bed, Oliver and Isabel stood on the balcony overlooking the estate. The stars shone brightly, their light reflecting in Isabel's eyes. We've come so far, Isabel said, her voice barely above a whisper. And we'll keep going, Oliver replied. No matter what comes next, we'll face it together. Isabel leaned her head on his shoulder, a contented smile on her lips. I love you, Oliver. Thank you for everything. I love you too, Isabel. More than words can ever say. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey of love, resilience, and redemption. What do you think about Oliver and Isabel's story? Did their unwavering strength and the power of forgiveness inspire you? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and share what touched your heart the most. And if you're as captivated by these stories as we are, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on the next unforgettable tale. Trust us, what's coming next will leave you speechless. Together, let's continue to celebrate the beauty of humanity, one story at a time. See you soon.